should be more areas that are protected so that we don't have, like, continue to have these, like, breakdowns. There's also, like, talking about coral reef bleaching. So this is what, like, the diagram shows, and it actually affects all creatures that create a hard exoskeleton in the ocean. And so those are things like mussels, clams, oysters, coral, snails, like all of those organisms are going to end up being harmed by this process. So pretty much what happens is that you have a lot of CO2 in our atmosphere, right? There's a certain level that it was at that was actually okay. It was fine. Like every organism was like doing their thing. And then of course humans went and decided to produce a bunch of it with no realization of the consequences or the manifestations of producing too much CO2, which means that our atmosphere is really acidic. And because the ocean covers 70% of our planet, right? There's a lot of surface area that atmosphere touches. And so that is where you get actually dissolved carbon dioxide. And that ends up mixing with water and creating carbonic acid. And so that is mostly an irreversible reaction, which means that you aren't able to make the calcium carbonate that you need to do for this. So if there's too much CO2, you can't make the calcium carbonate that the organisms need to survive, yeah, and to have actually like a hard exoskeleton that protects them.
Okay, so basically it's our fault that everything's going bad. Because like, I guess anything, for one, we breathe out carbon dioxide. For two, the vehicles that we have or things that we use in general, like it produces a bad carbon dioxide or something that goes to that eventually. So that bothers the atmosphere. So technically we're destroying the ocean.
Yeah. So that there are natural cycles of warming and cooling on our planet. However, the rate at which warming is occurring right now, it's one, very drastic, and two, it's happening way too fast, to the point where organisms can't adapt. So usually within those time frames, it's a couple thousand years or maybe even millions of years where it's either cooling or warming, which is why we have things as ice ages that were 5,000 years ago. But it took 5,000 years to get up to this place, pretty much. But once Industrial Revolution happened, that CO2 just shot up.
Thank you.
And so because of this process, our oceans are actually having a lower pH because that dissociates and gives the ocean more H+ ions. So this is what it looks like. It's really sad. So here, coral is healthy, it's vibrant, there's a lot of fish. That's what it looks like when the coral is actually dead.
Oh my, that's so sad.
Yeah.
So that's from the bleaching, so it actually bleaches the coral white.
Yeah, that's why we call it coral bleaching, because the organisms that live inside the coral die, the coral itself dies. What's left is their exoskeleton. And then you get no color anymore because of the acidity of it.
So question.
Yeah.
Since the coral dies and that eventually, does that eventually disintegrate and create that sand for the beaches?
It will eventually, yeah. Unless we do something to restore it.
Oh, you can restore it?
Yeah, so sometimes you can actually use the pre-existing coral and attach new coral to it. Depending on how strong it is. There are also really cool initiatives that have been working to reintroduce new coral or growing lab coral and then introducing it to the ocean so that it's actually growing, and there's really cool metal frames that they have been attaching coral to.
Oh, yeah.
There's concrete that they have been attaching coral to and putting it back where it should be. which is super cool. Yeah.
That's like, at least they trying to help, because if they thought anyone.
Well, it's a lot of the big companies that are producing the most CO2, and so it's important for us to take responsibility for our own actions, but also to encourage the big companies to stop.
And I feel like, to be honest, I feel like we could do it, but it just costs too much to do from this to that. Like, for instance, like throwing the cars. Like, we could all do electric cars, but it's too expensive because at the end of the day. A Tesla is like almost $100,000.
Okay. So the cool thing about that is that there's actually more electric cars than just a Tesla.
True, like other companies, but
yeah, which are just as good as Tesla.
right.
Like there's like VW, there's Toyota. There's
no, I get that, but I'm saying even for like they came out with the truck, like the big rig, like they were like the first company to come out with something like that. It's like other companies that it's so high in pricing, anything that reduces CO2 or helps the earth costs twice the amount of anything that costs a normal price. So it's like we can't afford it.
I mean, there are certain things that are more affordable now. Yeah. Okay. So we have just like one more section, but you both can ask questions.
I know, and it's right above.